Welcome, everyone. Today, we're here for another episode of Head in the Clouds. But today, I've got my good friend and tech leader, David Linthicum. And today, we're going to have a very interesting discussion for you. We're going to talk about what is cloud architecture. We're going to talk about why you can't be a cloud architect and a cloud engineer at the same time. We'll talk about what are the goals of cloud architecture. We'll talk about what are the skills of the cloud architect, those really good skills that are going to help you stand out and rise above everyone else in your career. And we're going to talk about one of the most critical things, and it's a problem we see every day, why cloud architects cannot afford to be biased. And this is absolutely essential for both our client success as well as your long-term career success. So I'm really excited to have this. Here's what you're going to notice. We're both going to answer these questions and we're going to get slightly different answers. And here's the reason why. Architecture is one of these amorphous careers where you could be doing a lot of different things in your architect career. And, David and I together have over 60 years experience. First cloud I actually worked on was the ISDN cloud in 1993, followed by the Frame Relay cloud in 1996, followed by the ATM cloud in 1998, followed by the VPLS cloud, which my team helped create in 2001. And then in my team at Cisco, we were consulting the cloud providers to help them build their own clouds. And I know David's been working on clouds since the beginning. I know he's done the same things that I have. He's led companies, run companies, and in the end of the day, it's all architecture. So looking forward to an exciting and fun discussion today. And then, of course, we'll answer your questions so we can make sure that you can build any type of cloud architecture, even other cloud computing career that you desire. But before we begin, Chris actually wanted to introduce some concepts about today. So I'll let Chris kick it off. And then after that, David and I are going to have some fun. We'll talk about some things. We'll share our experience and then ask your questions because we want to help you all.
All right. So I don't want to take up too much time because I always love to get right to what Mike and David have to say. I don't have my popcorn with me this time. I realized eating popcorn during the show last time was probably not the most professional thing to do. But, it's always entertaining when these two are together. But I want to invite Tyrone to cut off my head up here. And if you will, share the link to our webinar this Thursday about how to get your first cloud architect job. If you're brand new, don't even know what a cloud architect is, well, you're going to find out today what a cloud architect is. But if you're interested in learning more and being able to interact and ask questions off mute and not be limited to a chat box, join us for that webinar on Thursday. It'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern time. You'll have Mike, Alonso, and I'll be in the background. I try not to get in the way in those things, but I'll be there in the background as well for that webinar. But it's always a great time. It's completely free. We'll share with you what's necessary to be a cloud architect, what CIOs and others say the cloud architect role actually is. We'll share with you what the skills are. We'll share with you how to deal with HR, and we'll share with you how to achieve the goal of becoming a cloud architect and getting your first cloud architect job. Next, I also want to make sure that everybody knows that in case you don't want to join us live, and in case you don't want to have the opportunity to ask questions in real time, in case you don't want to do that, and you just want to read it by yourself, guess what? We got a book for that. We got an e-guide. We got an e-book about the exact same topic. So you can get that as well. So you don't have to listen to us. If you don't want to listen, you can read. So that's there for you as well. And then in addition to that, we've got a lot of e-guides, but I'm only going to tell you about 2 of them today. We also have the why tech skills aren't enough. And I'm going to take that out another step. Why tech skills aren't enough to be successful in today's technology careers. Because it's more than the tech. It's always more than the tech. So get that, another free, completely free guide for you. Not saying the tech isn't necessary, just saying it's not enough if you want to be that high achieving, long-term career success person. Get that free guide for yourself and enjoy. So I will see if Alonso's got any words to share before we let these two take the show and run with it. Alonso?
Hey, couldn't said it better, Chris. David, it's always great to have you here along with Mike. I always get excited. I always take a look at Mike's and David's posts. David just always comes through with all the hard-hitting, great information about the cloud throughout his experience. I definitely recommend everyone take a look at what he's posting, and it helps to edify your overall cloud competency experience. But you know what? I can talk about this all day. Gentlemen, start your engines. I'm ready to hear what you guys have to say.
All right, Mike and David, we will leave it with you, and we'll just be back here in the studio.
Sounds great. So David and I are going to have this discussion. Before we begin, those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO of Go Cloud Careers. I've been in tech now since 1996, technically 1993, but I feel better saying 1996. I've spent much of my life as a network architect, enterprise architect, business architect, cloud architect, and many other things. I'm here with David Linthicum. I'll let you introduce himself, but I got to tell you, he's got a book that he recently published, The Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. Many of my students are reading it. It is fantastic. David has been a CEO, a CTO, and he's been in tech now for a long time. So, David, I'm really happy you're here again. David, if you'd like to introduce yourself before we get into the content.
Yeah, Dave Linthicum. I'm really just kind of a cloud SME. As I was focused on cloud computing, enterprise computing for the last 30 years, 17 books, all on enterprise technology and how to be successful with it. Latest book, Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing, kind of share some insider tricks into what people normally won't tell you around cloud computing. Speak all over the place in Cloud on InfoWorld, and just kind of focus like a laser on making people successful with technology and at the enterprise level. The ability to bring value back to the business as much as possible has been my focus for the last 20 years. Certainly cloud is a part of that, but it's also everything, how you leverage different architectural concepts and networking and efficient use of IT and the ability to do the hiring that you need and skills training, all that kind of stuff. Full service IT.
So there you can see David and I have been pretty much doing the same thing for decades. We're going to both answer this question, what is cloud architecture? Because I want to see you hear it from two different perspectives. I'll give you my definition, David will give you his, and notice they're going to be a little different. And that's okay. But first, before I define what is cloud architecture, let me tell you what is cloud computing. Cloud computing is renting space in somebody else's data center. That's the way I view cloud computing. I've been building clouds for decades. They have servers in there. They have load balancers in there. They have storage area networks in there. They have business applications in there. They've got firewalls in there. They've got other security appliances in there. And you know what the cloud is? The same thing, but you rent space in there. So here's my definition of cloud architecture. Cloud architecture is designing a solution to help our customers achieve whatever their business goals are. So for me, that means finding the vision of the business. Where does that business want to be a few years from now? For me, that actually means understanding how the business operates today with what you call a business architecture, and then understand how you want that business to operate in the future with their new business architecture, and then finding all the technologies that is going to make that business more successful. The technologies will affect the people that work in that organization, the way the business does things with business processes, and it will affect the technology to achieve those goals. So for me, cloud architecture is designing an end-to-end solution, whether it's in a private cloud, like a data center, a public cloud like AWS or Azure, a hybrid cloud, which is a data center and a public cloud, a multi-cloud, which is like an AWS, Azure, or Google, or a hybrid multi-cloud, which is like an AWS plus your Nutanix cloud or your OpenStack cloud, or a super cloud, which is basically across all the clouds. But for me, it's aligning the technology to an organization's business strategy. How do you feel about that? What would your definition be, David?
That was almost a perfect definition of cloud architecture, Mike, in my opinion. The only thing I would add is my really quick elevator definition of it. It's the ability to configure technology, cloud and non-cloud technology, in such a way that it returns the maximum value back to the business. And that includes everything. It includes the network, it includes the databases, it includes servers that exist on public cloud providers, private cloud providers, and exist in the data center. So cloud architecture, you got to remember, is systemic and all-encompassing now. And so if people are saying, well, I'm a cloud architect, I'm just focusing on building stuff on AWS or Microsoft or Google or a particular walled garden someplace, that it really doesn't solve the problem. Your ability to leverage your technology in the fundamental way that it's going to maximize, it's going to be optimized to bring the maximum value back to the business. You got to remember, architects are extremely important because we can get to a working state any number of paths. The idea here is to get to a working state that's going to provide the best optimized solution that's going to bring the most value back to the business. We're going to see businesses in the next 5 to 10 years fail. And the reason they're going to fail, they're going to cite that they didn't get the right advice to build technology and configure it in such a way they built up too much technical debt. They weren't able to automate things they needed to automate, and it cost too much for the infrastructure they're paying for through the amount of money that they're putting into it. Architects are the head of the spear in terms of getting those things done, making sure they're configured correctly. An extremely important job in IT. I view it as more important than the CIO or who's just basically doing the meta management stuff, because ultimately someone needs to make decisions about what technology needs to be applied in what way to make the business successful. And that's why architects exist, cloud architects for sure, but enterprise architecture, network architectures, people who do any kind of planning configuration of technology, extremely important to the business.
You know, it's interesting. Maybe before we get to the next content, let's talk about what is a cloud architect. And we're both going to have our own definitions again, and that's great. To me, the architect is that hybrid business executive plus technology professional, that person that can lay eyes on between the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, the CTO, and say, these are the business needs that you have in your strategy for the future, and let me go plan and design a solution for you. So it's kind of like a hybrid person, where it's, maybe 20 to 50% technical and 50 to 80% non-technical, depending upon whether it's an enterprise architect or cloud architect. But for me, I hate the term cloud architect. I hate the term enterprise architect. I would just use architect, because no matter what role you're doing, if you're a network architect, you're designing the network to make sure the network supports the business needs. If you're a cloud architect, you're kind of all encompassing everything. If you're an application architect, you're focusing on the applications to support the business needs. If you're an AI architect, you're designing AI systems to support the business needs. That's the way I see it. But to me, I'm more biased on the business, because I see so many people get biased on the tech, and it's like they fall in love with a piece of tech. They want to go straight to the tech, and then they end up hurting the business because they're trying to apply their tech like a hammer in search of a nail. What's your definition of a cloud architect?
Yeah. Ultimately, again, pretty much the same as yours. And the fact of the matter is that the IT has to serve the needs of the business. And that's always needs to be the case. And that has a tendency to kind of fall off the radar screen for many enterprises out there. They're going after the shiny technology. We just had the big cloud computing conferences come back. Everybody comes home with their idea, some kind of a pet technology going to leverage in a certain way. And they're going to basically, try to find a problem to solve with the particular technology out there. That never can be the case. It really should be business focused in terms of how the business needs to operate moving forward. So the best architects out there, using whatever technology they need to leverage, are going to have the capability of leveraging the right technology in the right ways to, again, bring the maximum amount of value to the business. And by doing that, you need to understand the business. So I always said, architects need to have a core level understanding of everything that's going on. If you talk to an architect and they start telling you about how great serverless technology is and how it's going to be applied there, and you ask them some questions about how the business functions and what they're going to use it for and how they're going to apply it, and they really can't respond to that, that's not a good architect, because they certainly understand some very cool technology and some of the shinier objects, but they don't understand what the business requires. So architects, to your point, should be business leaders as well as technology leaders. So they has to have this hybrid kind of way. And it's funny, I used to explain to people when I went on job interviews, they asked me what kind of a technician I was. I'm hybrid. I spend half my time understanding the business and managing the business, even doing talent management and people management and business process management. And the other half really kind of picking the technology to make it happen. And if you don't have your feet in both sides of that, you're not going to be able to make the core decisions. And I think that people have a tendency to, certainly in their careers, to pick one way or the other. They go too far in the business end, don't understand the technology, and then up making bad technology decisions. You don't see that as much, but you do see it. But for the majority of the time, you see people who are vast and who are wallowing in technology, understand the buzzwords, and really kind of understand particular technology sets, who are not necessarily understanding the business and end up making serial bad decisions. Doesn't mean they're leveraging bad technology. They're just leveraging the wrong technology for this particular problem domain that they're working in. And I think ultimately that's where people are, that's where the whole things are falling down. And so we need to emphasize, as we stress how to be a good architect, is that you really kind of need to understand both things. And people have a tendency to want to go one way or the other. That's not what architecture is. You want to go off and be an engineer and focus on something. You want to focus on a particular cloud provider and become an architect just for that provider, providing tactical solutions for that. That's all well and good, but you're not going to be an architect. You're going to have specialized capabilities that are not going to be sustainable through the architectural role.
Yeah, and that's the key. People come to me and they're like, Mike, I want to learn how I can configure this. I want to do all these DevOps things. I want to do all these things. I want to be hands-on, and I want to be an architect. And I say, well, you can't be a cloud architect and a cloud engineer at the same time, because if you're busy building all day, you're not focusing on the business. You know, that architect, at least I'll tell you what I do, and then I'd love to hear your perspective. They need to start at that C-suite. What does that business need? And that means they need to speak to to be able to speak to the C-suite, which means they need to understand what the C-suite cares about. Then in my mind, they need to actually understand business, whether that be revenue, whether that be net income, whether they be how that organization makes their money, its value chain. To me, that's absolutely critical. Then, and my perspective is, you know, as architects, we present constantly. So there's a degree of presentations we have to do. And then I like to call it herding cats, but it's really stakeholder management. We get to the client, and the client has 800 business units, and they all have competing interests. And we kind of sort of have to, you know, massage that and try to make those pieces work. Then we've got to go help sell a deal, negotiate a deal. By the time we're done that, we're helping the sales team build the business case. We're responding to RFIs, RFPs, and RFQs. And then we've got to build the statement of work, build an implementation plan, and make sure the right people are there. And then from my perspective, every architecture I've always done, we hand it over to a build team. And another set of people builds it. And then once it's done being built, then they've got the maintenance people, the sysops people, and they maintain it. And then it breaks, and then they call the technical support people. So that's the way I see it. And that's why I see you can't fly an airplane and keep the the passengers in their seats at the same time. What about your perspective on being an architect and an engineer, or the role separation, and why they're important to do so?
Yeah, it's important that we do separate them. You got to remember, someone has to focus on strategy and the configuration of technology components to, you know, make the thing work and maximize the business, everything we're just talking about. And then someone else needs to focus on how you carry it out or building it. And so the engineer is typically subordinate to the architect, and the architect subordinate to the business. So the architect understands where the business is looking to go, and they can look at the technology, configure the technology correctly. It's the engineer's job to figure out how to deploy it, how to figure out the technical details behind it. Again, you don't want to, as an architect, digging too deep down in the technology. You understand what it does and stuff that's going to work and not work, and make sure you go through testing cycles and acceptance and those sorts of things. But when you push it off into the engineering community, while they're typically coupled to you, in other words, they're working with you, they're going to have a very different job than you have. So they're going to be focused on a particular technology set. And so that's why we have network engineers and security engineers and database engineers and AI engineers now, and data scientists. All these certain tactical roles that are going to carry out specific expertise or skills that the architect typically isn't going to have, because they can't have that. If they're getting down to in the details of the weeds, they're not necessarily doing their job. And so in many instances, like I said, people have a tendency to want to get involved too deep in the technology and not understand, the macro steps that's going on. I always use the macro, micro architectures. Architecture looking at the macro technologies configuration. In other words, how it's going to work within the business, how it's going to make the business work. Engineers are going to look at the micro technology, or technology in the narrow. They're focused on making stuff work. That doesn't mean they don't report back to the architect that something's not working and then we need to reevaluate and configure things. That's going to be the case. We're not giving them a problem that they can't solve. And they're going to be working together, but the roles are completely different. And I think that it's funny, you see some of the architecture courses that are coming out of the public cloud providers right now, they're engineering courses. So they're teaching them how to code and how to design and build stuff, which is very good. I understand why we need those skills, but they're not necessarily doing architecture in the wide. They're doing engineering in the narrow. And we have a tendency to kind of conflate the two. And I think that's not necessarily doing a service. And so when people are hiring architects, in many instances, they're not looking for the right skills. I see this all the time in job postings where they're saying they're looking for an enterprise architect, and then list Python and Java and those sorts of things, but those aren't necessarily architecture skills. No. Those are engineering skills. And so they're looking for an engineer. They're just unwilling to say that because they heard the term architect from the particular cloud providers. And by the way, they're looking for certifications that are more along the lines of what an engineer would be, and not necessarily getting the architect. So suddenly you have an architect that's really an engineer. They're acting like an engineer in their job because we hired them with engineering skills, really kind of on the list of things that we think they needed to leverage, and they failed. and they fail for reasons that are our fault. They're self-inflicted because we're not hiring for this meta role, this configuration role, which is all too important. The CTO is typically not doing that. The CIO is typically not doing that. We have an architect. This is a role that's been around for 30 some odd years. We've had the enterprise architect and now we have our enterprise architects that exist with different technologies such as cloud that know how to make these and configure these things. We redefine that role as to something that's overly tactical and overly technical, and therefore we lost the capabilities. And that's why we're making a lot of mistakes right now. You kind of trace back some of these core failures that are occurring, rise of technical debt, those sorts of things. We've made core technological mistakes because we didn't look at the strategy of the business as aligned to the technology. We just pursued a technology end goal without understanding what the business needs were. And that's going to succeed a very small percentage of the time. And so therefore it works, but it costs 5 times as much to run and operate. And we keep building up this list of inefficiencies that go on, and pretty soon it breaks the business, and then we have to reset it and go back and fix it. And that's what you hear, the optimization word right now. You're hearing that all over the place. That's because people made so many mistakes in engineering and architecting their cloud systems that they're having to go back and redefine how the architecture is going to happen, actually rising up to look at the strategic planning needs to make this happen, because it's just, again, misfocusing on things that we need to focus on, using the wrong skills and the wrong roles.
And I see it every day. To me, one of the scariest things are the cloud providers have their let's get together conference and get you all excited about these things. Then they have certifications, which are the name of a service and how to configure that service, which doesn't teach you how any of it works underlying. And if you don't know how it works, you can't design it. And then they hide what the actual technology is, as if you didn't know. And then it's got to be serverless. We got to use this. We got to use this. And then the cloud providers make a well-architected framework, and they all have something like this. I'm not picking on anyone. And it's how do I use as much of that cloud provider's technology as possible? They barely ever discuss, focusing on the business. They don't focus on digital transformation. They don't focus on the people, the processes, or the technology, or anything the architects do. It's all like, use my stuff. Get excited. Isn't this life changing? And then I see these press releases come out. Brand new feature. You can put a security group on a load balancer. And it's like, yeah, but F5 did that 20 years ago. It's not new. It's all the same thing. But if you don't know it, imagine going to a CIO and saying, I got a really new feature. I can create you a virtual wire from point A to point B. And they're like, yeah, I've been doing this for 35 years. But we can't afford to be biased, because the architect's biased and has a favorite technology. They put it everywhere. They become like a hammer in search of the nail, in my perspective. They need to be biased for the business. CIO magazine actually put a really good article out, What is a Cloud Architect? And they said they were looking for someone that can lead the cultural change for adoption, someone that can develop and coordinate a cloud strategy, and someone that could help with the adoption process and lead so that's what CIO magazine says we want. That's what we're hiring. And then we've got certifications which promote vendor bias and engineering, and not even engineering. I'd call them systems administration skills, because to be an engineer, you have to understand how the technology works. If I told you that I interviewed 1,000 AWS certified people and asked them these 3 questions, what is cloud computing? And none of them could even answer it. And I actually asked them, what are these things? And nobody knew. They just knew the name, but they all knew how to configure it, which really freaks me out. So what are they configuring?
Well, it's tactical approaches, which is becoming more valued and more popular than the meta approaches. Understanding the holistic value and view of technology, versus how we're deploying the technology. So we're so focused on deployment of the technology. We just had reInvent last week, and if you look at the focuses there was a few architectural conferences. Grow Hope ran one, things like that, but they're not as well attended as people looking at the net new products and trying to get certification in particular products. And you got to remember, there's a reason why that is, Mike, is there's $20 billion in marketing that's pushing everybody toward particular technologies. And you have a marketing machine that's very, very hard to work around. That marketing machine is able to penetrate most enterprises and penetrate most people who are getting out of college and really kind of redefining their career. So they're moving in those directions. And so if you hear people talk about what you're going to do with your technical career, it's normally around, they'll say technology. I'm going after AWS security. I'm going after Microsoft databases. I'm going after generative AI systems that run on AWS or Google. And that's all well and good, but ultimately that's not a career path. And you got to remember, if you're binding yourself to technology, that's going to have a durable life. In other words, we're going to get to the end of the state of the technology where it's not going to be as worth as much anymore, and you're going to have to shift and pivot to other things. So my advice to them is that it is okay to understand what those technologies do. However, it may be a better career direction for you. By the way, we need engineers who understand that. But to understand the holistic nature of the technology and what everything actually means. In other words, how we can look at existing best practices and architectural patterns and apply those in a certain way where it's repeatable from enterprise domain to enterprise domain and make those things work better than they did in the past. And it's just something that we have fallen off from. And maybe that's a theme of what we're talking about right now. We're not necessarily focused on this technology as being this configuration, this planning, this strategy as being as important as it needs to be as far as the selection of the technology and what we need to be. So this becomes a refocusing, and I talk about this in my book a lot. This becomes a refocusing on what technology means, what business advantages has, and really kind of getting the business focus back into the discussion. People always tell me you're a designated buzzkill, Dave, because I'm the one who brings up the fact that we have business needs to look at and have to bring the business analysts in here to figure out how this is going to apply to the particular business. And by the way, let's put together metrics in figuring out how to declare success to make sure that we're using a configuration which is going to be able to bring the most value back to business. Something people don't want to deal with, and I understand why. And the reality is that we've also changed over the last 20 years. We picked the wrong technology. We're typically going to get to a failed state, which means we're going to reset and go back and repick the technology. Now we're at such a point in technology development that we can pick the wrong technology and get to what we perceive as a success. In other words, get these things up and running, an incredibly inefficient system. I view it as hugely dangerous. I see things all the time where people have made decisions based on tactical biases to the point you just made, for the wrong reasons, the wrong decisions. And they get to the point and they say, well, it works. And I said, okay, it works. Let's run the metrics on what this is versus another potential architecture that leverages this technology stack. And let's look at the inefficiencies between where you are and what this thing can be, and then look at the delta of it. And it ends up being 10, 20 times that of the operational cost, the operational risk, the amount of technical debt that's being built, than these other target solutions that were considered. And you go down and you figure out, you do the kind of postmortem of why this happened. Well, the CIO's neighbor works for Microsoft. It comes down to that. And by the way, it works. And say, okay, it works, but we're not looking at what's important to the business. And I think those discussions are they're coming back, by the way. I'm getting more and more requests from organizations. Now they got the big cloud bill in 2022. People they figured, as I wrote in my book, they're paying 2.5 times as much for their cloud computing deployments as they thought they were. And the reality is it's self-inflicted wounds because they didn't have an architectural planning process in place to make sure they're picking the right technology, pick something entirely inefficient, and therefore they're not getting the value that's returned to the business. Now they want to talk about efficiency and optimization and refactoring and re-engineering. They call it modernization, by the way. That's kind of the buzzword where we screwed up and we're trying to fix stuff. We're modernizing. But I think those are going to become more in vogue over the next few years. I called for it next year in my InfoWorld predictions for 2024. I think that optimization is going to come back into vogue, even though it's a boring word. No one wants to talk about it. It's not something you bring up at cocktail parties, but it's absolutely something I think every business can benefit from.
Yeah, to me, it honestly feels like when I used to practice internal medicine a long, long time ago, and a drug rep would come in to try and excite us about the brand new drug with the hopes that if they brought us enough dinners, desserts, and other things and took us on vacations, we'd prescribe something. And then in the end, we'd find out about the side effects years later and the problems that they occurred. So addiction. For me, I remember when I was the lead healthcare architect at Cisco, and I remember every client I would go to, it was almost as if somebody was going to ask me, Mike, what's the best technology? What's the best electronic health record? And almost every time I said, let's evaluate how you run your business now and how you want to run your business in the future. How do your nurses do their job? How do your doctors do their job? How does a patient get admitted? And then, it was interesting. My clients did well, but the US government mandated electronic health records. They said, you must use these by this date, or you're going to be fined, and it's going to cost you reimbursement. So they forced that. Prior to electronic health records, with people like me writing chicken scratch on a piece of paper, medical errors were the 5th leading cause of death. You must use electronic health records. They went up, medical errors went up 250%, and it became the 3rd leading cause of death. So, I mean, to me, that was about as bad of an architecture as you could think of. But the point is my clients did well because we focused on the business. We thought how people worked, and we chose systems based upon their needs, not just some cool technology, what was the best. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I get a lot of people that they take these certifications and they think it's that Google or Microsoft or AWS is the solution to everything. And they don't realize that at least in every architecture I work with, I'm using next generation firewalls from security vendors. I'm using some kind of security event management from a company that does that. We're using databases predominantly from Oracle or Microsoft. Then we're adding these business applications from this organization, some voice from Cisco. And in the end, it's not like they would teach in a certification. It's about choosing the right technology for the right business's needs. And that's what I'm seeing. Are you seeing any single vendor, any environments for an enterprise?
Yeah, you do. People will tell you they're an AWS shop or a Microsoft shop. I hear that all the time, which means they're going to keep in that ecosystem and not necessarily try to stretch out of that ecosystem, which does have its advantages. There's reasons why you want to look at that as a potential option, but the thing is, it shouldn't be your only option.
No.
If I'm looking at a single vendor solution, I'm looking at a solution that's going to be under optimized for sure, because they're going down and they're picking whatever technology that vendor has because it's easier to do because they have the existing relationship, but it may be the wrong selection of technology for the wrong reasons. And so the AI stuff is a big example of that. So we're using the AI technology in the cloud provider that we consider our primary cloud provider, our only cloud provider. And so we're going to stick with them, and therefore we're going to use that particular system when it's missing lots of features that some of the other generative AI technologies running on some of the cloud providers have. Of course, the downside of that is you end up going with a multi-cloud and a heterogeneous solution, things like that. But if you move in that direction in a planned state, you're going to get to a better architectural outcome than you would if you just going to build things on the native systems, whatever they dictate that it make it happen. So it's funny, it's getting better, but I used to go into lots of projects and they would say, you're part of the AWS project. And I said, why are we using AWS? Not pick on AWS, but it's well, we announced 2 years ago they're a primary cloud provider, and they had some sort of a signing deal and press release and all that kind of stuff. And that always told me that we're going to end up with an in-state solution, which is highly inefficient. And of course, I will mention that it's going to be highly inefficient based on the fact we're limiting our solutions and limiting our selections to away from best of breed technology. And this is kind of the path that they chose. And you see this even today. It used to be more prevalent 5 years ago because the cloud providers went out and they got these big companies to sign up. And by the way, we're going to give you a 50% discount on our stuff in perpetuity if you go ahead and sign in inclusive with us. And that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. And it's funny, I called it out at the time. I used to write blog posts that everybody thought were outrageous and probably going to get me fired, talking how this was a dumb thing because they're going to make the wrong decisions guaranteed based on the fact they pre-picked a path without understanding the impact of the business and understanding the technology they're going to leverage. And what happened is that in many instances, cooler heads prevailed, and we got a good architect in there that was able to say, hey, listen, look, we can't do this. We're going to get to a more efficient state. Let's start planning and move in this direction. We're using heterogeneous technology, leveraging best of breed stuff, and we're going to go ahead and get out of this particular deal. And see a lot of those things, if you go back in time, they occurred 5-10 years ago. That's not the case today. Now they're a multi-cloud deployment. They're picking technology based on the value of the technology. They're becoming a little bit better with it. But that was before they built up a lot of technical debt, based on the fact that they just kicked a lot of these cans down the road. A lot of the lifting and shifting was a big culprit of that. In other words, someone made the architectural decision that we're going to be inefficient in the cloud because we're not going to change the lick of code because we think it's too expensive and risky to change the lick of code. So we're going to take it on this Linux system on premise, and we're going to put it on this Linux system in the cloud, and it compiles, we're ready to go. Let's move to the next application, the next data set, things like that. And so that's where the inefficiencies came from. We talk about the 2.5 times the amount, the cost of running it on the cloud than we thought it was going to be. That's where they occurred. And so these systems were not designed to work effectively on the cloud, and they weren't architected for that. No one made the decision, the architectural decision, that we're going to refactor and modernize these systems to leverage cloud native features, native APIs, run better performance systems, or even run them on different cloud providers, or even not run them on cloud providers based on the fact they had certain attributes that would leave them on premise. And those are the tougher decisions that I think needed to be made, weren't made, but they need to be made now. So in many instances, we're going to have to hit the reset button and kind of admit to the fact that we moved 1,000 applications to the cloud, 500 of them shouldn't have been moved to the cloud. We're going to have to either move them to another cloud or move them back on premise, or that we're going to have to refactor them, modernize them in place, and we're going to have to deal with the cost of doing that. The board of directors and the CIOs will go, hey, listen, look, what you told us 10 years ago that this was going to be save us money and, and make things better, more agile and things like that. Oopsie daisy, here we go. But let's learn from those mistakes. Everybody's going to make those mistakes. We're the ability to look at this stuff strategically and just take a beat. It doesn't take that much time and energy to sit down and have a discussion and have someone smart, have different consultants, and take a look at the problem domain you're moving into and understand your business issues, even just to stage the questions that need to be answered. In other words, ask the questions ultimately in terms of what value is going to be coming back from these things. I talk about doing metrics. I always do it all the time as part of any engagement that I have. So I have a mathematical formula I can use to leverage to figure out how much value is coming back based on this configuration versus the other configurations. They're not that tough to do. They don't take that much to plug the data in, and the decisions come right up to the surface in terms of what decisions we should be made. At the very least, it externalizes the inefficiencies that are likely to happen, which I think we haven't done in the past, that we need to now. So in other words, if you want to go off in this way, you're going to go with a single vendor solution, then you're leaving this much money on the table. If that's okay with you, go ahead. And they can make the decision. Or if you're in charge, then you're able to become a good steward of the business and a good steward of the stockholders, and make sure you're making the right decisions, even though it may be boring decisions, leaving things on premise and, using different cloud providers than currently providing, not going to generative AI because that's not indicated based on the use cases that we have. And in essence, getting to an optimized state of the particular architecture, not necessarily using the cool technologies and not necessarily using the technologies of the neighbors of the CIO, and end up picking the right path. And so I think it comes down to you tell me, Mike, I think it comes down to courage at the end of the day. You have to have, kind of the courage, I have the stupidity, not the courage. I probably said things, like that have hindered my career, and, these little beefs that occur around, good architectural decisions, things like that. But I think you have to have the courage to bring it up. And I think those people have to have the fortitude and courage in these organizations, perhaps students that come through your training, get out in the fact that we're going to ask these questions. They need answers. And if we don't get answers, then we need to talk about why we didn't get to the answers.
I completely agree with you. I remember we're going back close to 20 years ago. I was at a technology organization, a big one. And one of the sales reps and their sales engineer promoted a solution for a hospital. And they brought me in as a strategy consultant to go in there. And the chief nursing officer says to me, "What do you think of this, Mike?" I said, quite frankly, I think this solution will make the life of the nurse harder. It'll make the life of the doctor harder, and it'll increase your expenses. I said, now these technologies, if we use them differently, could deliver a lot of value for business, but not like this. The room went quiet. The account team looked at me like, oh my God, we're going to kill Mike. But they smiled. And then the CEO was in the room, the chief medical informatics officer and the chief nursing officer smiled and said, that's what I've been saying the entire time. Michael, would you design us a system? And boy, did I do so. And boy, did it work for them. But the key is I focused on the business's goals, the account team, and they were a great account team focused on the technology because that's what they do. Sales reps are taught to sell. Sales engineers are there to sell and make sure that their sales reps don't sell something that's not going to work. But, so it's that. So if we're talking about being fair, and we're talking about looking holistically, and we're talking about being unbiased, and we're talking to be about a management consultant or a strategy consultant, so let's talk about the skills for the cloud architect or the enterprise architect. I'll give you mine, and then I want to hear yours. And I bet you they're similar. They're a little different, but for me, they're the following. You have to be executive relevant, meaning you have to understand what they're talking about and position things that are there. I think you need good leadership skills, because I've never done an architecture by myself that's above, $5 million. Every architecture I work on is, 20 million to $1 billion. And for me, the architect needs to lead a team. I'm bringing in security people, networking people, big data people, data science people, you name it, IAM people for everything. To me, it's the ability to sell. And I don't just mean selling a solution. I mean selling a vision, selling people to want to work on your team, just sales in general. To me, it's emotional intelligence, because you're going to walk in situations just like you described, and somebody sold something that's 5 times more expensive than it needed to be. And then you've got to go smooth out those rough edges and make your client successful. To me, it's business acumen, because if you don't know business, how are you going to design a solution to improve business in the first place? And then once we get into presentation skills, because we're presenting constantly, it's writing skills, because how many thought leadership papers do you write and documents do you write? And it's that, and then it's negotiation skills, because we've been doing it. To me, it's stakeholder management. And then we get into the technical design skills, which means you truly have to have fundamentals on the networking, the data center, the cloud, the applications that organizations use, security. They're my set of skills for the cloud architect. What are your set of cloud architect skills?
I think it should be really, I describe it as jack of all trades is the best cloud architect. And someone who understands and has worked in networking and database and process design and architecture and even hardware design. Just a bunch of different archaic skills that kind of come together where I understand a bit of everything. And so if someone, by the way, tells me they're very data focused, then okay, well, that means you're going to think of data every time you try to design something. And that's going to be part of the problem. I'm glad you're here, but an architecture is going to encompass data processes, security, all monitoring operational systems, things like that. And someone who is empathetic for doing lots of different things. I mean, one of the things in my career, I had lots of different roles. I did database design. I went to whatever jobs were paying the most. Database design, I did network design. I did security engineering, all these different kind of an eclectic array of jobs. But the thing is, I understood enough about a lot of stuff where I wasn't really an expert in any particular thing, but I could certainly understand and communicate with the executives and communicate with people you needed to communicate to as to what these things are, the roles that they're able to do, and why they're needed. And I see architects that are leaving stuff out all the time because they may not have an empathetic understanding of it. You're probably more aware of network misdesigns and network engineering issues.
Absolutely.
And I'm aware of data engineering and security issues because I've deep skills with that. But the reality is the questions need to be asked. So if you're a good architect, you may never have been a network engineer, but you need to say, have the network performance models been done? Has the network engineer certified that the design of the system is going to be scalable for the particular loads that we're going to put on it, moving it to the cloud or whatever? Security systems, we're using identity access management. Are we able to use multi-factor authentication that's able to provide these capabilities to keep us out of compliance problems? And it kind of the list goes on. And so it's having some skills and having knowledge. I'm always suspicious of an architect that hasn't done any of those jobs before. Even if in passing. In other words, they come up the ranks. They may have interned sometimes, and they had a database design job where they may configure databases. But they understand what they are, what the functional role is, and the fact that they need to exist as part of the architecture. I see people leaving governance out of their architecture all the time because they have no experience in it. It's not often talked about in different architectural classes. It is in mine. And therefore, that's going to leave a huge hole in your ability to create a well-governed, a well-controlled and monitored architecture. I see people leaving operational systems out of it because they have no empathy for how things are going to be operated, and therefore turn things over to operations without understanding how they're going to be maintain longer term. And therefore that part is missing out of the architecture. So I think this comes down to a lot of things. My perfect architect, if I'm going to build somebody, it's probably not going to be me, may not be you, but it's somebody who has lots of different skills and understanding. And if what they don't have, they have an understanding of. They're an autodidact. They'll read a book on database design. They'll read a book on network design. They'll look at a video on how to do governance systems, and look at different computer security scenarios and keep up with the industry, to the point they're able to have a discussion in multiple areas of use. If I ask an architect and said, well, what's your security approach? And they say, I don't do security. I got a security guy, or security person. Well, that's not the answer you want, because I don't want you to be the engineer, but I want you to tell me that you have identity access management system using this level of encryption and using this level of encryption because you're supporting this particular compliance standard, which is native to your particular industry that you're in. Those are the kind of answers that you want. If you don't get those answers, you're not really talking to an architect. You're talking to someone who's really piecemealing their career, and they probably don't belong in that role. That doesn't mean they can't train, go under, get different technologies and then take that role on, but that's a very different skill set than someone who has an engineering capabilities. And again, I think we talked about this last time. We're looking for the self-learner. We're looking for the motivated individual that's able to take classes and read and understand and ask questions and is inquisitive, that gets that level of understanding where they're going to be more effective as an architect. If they're not asking those questions, they're not doing their job.
And that's the thing. And I've taken lots of people that had no background and got them architect jobs. And I've taken people with 20 years experience and trained them for architect jobs. Here's the funny thing. Sometimes if someone has too much engineering experience, you'd think it would help them, but in my experience, it comes back to bite them, because they become so focused on the technology itself that they forget the rest of the world around them. And at the same time, when I've got someone that we train, and when they're working everywhere, but we train and they don't have the tech background, it's a much harder learning curve for them to understand the aspects of security, the aspects of networking, the aspects of data center, the aspects of application design. But yeah, it's really the person that's willing to learn. And I love the way you said autodidactic, because that to me is really essential. You've got to have good fundamentals, and then you've got to be able to read. And one of the things that we say to our students is, look at the source of the information. Where are you getting it? If I get it from you, I'm totally comfortable, because you've been in the industry long enough. I'm not going to get it from someone that's been an architect for 3 months that hasn't even figured out what an architect is. I also tell my people, if you want to learn about Cisco stuff, go to the Cisco website. You want to learn about AWS stuff, go read their website. Don't watch a YouTube video, go to the website itself. You want to learn about security, learn security. See what Palo Alto is doing, see what Checkpoint's doing, see what Fortinet's doing, learn security principles, learn non-vendor proprietary stuff too. Understand a security policy, understand all of that, but get that holistic view of it. To me, that's the thing as an architect. You can't but just miss stuff, because if you miss stuff, there's something missing. And if the architecture isn't complete, the business is going to suffer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, and that gets to a different archetype, so to speak, of a person that we're looking for. Yeah, and it's changing over time. My expectations are different. I'm not necessarily looking for someone that has 50 years experience, even though in many instances that's helpful. I'm looking for someone that's an active learner, that's inquisitive, that's able to ask the questions that need to be asked, and able to have, mentioned before, the C word, the courage to, in essence, be disruptive in their roles, and making sure everybody is seeing and asking the difficult questions that are much more harder to answer. In other words, why is this the ultimate thing that we're looking to do? The configuration of technology that's going to get the business to the next level. Is that a question that's being asked? And if it is being asked, what are the answer to that? Well, we think so. Okay, why do you think so? Let's dig into that. Well, we think this is the architecture that we heard at the last cloud conference, and everybody's cool with it. And so we're going with it. I said, no, what are the metrics of success that we're getting into, and how are we measuring this? And I understand why it's a bummer to ask those questions. I mean, Friday at 5 p.m., someone's bringing this up. Last thing you want to hear is go through this rigmarole again. You want to get to happy hour. But I also understand that it's really coming down to the success or failure of the business. We're getting to a point now where we're going to do triages on businesses that could do completely face plant and fail. And we're going to link them back to bad technology architectural decisions that were made 10 years ago because they hired the wrong people to make the wrong decisions, and they hitched their wagon to the wrong technology providers probably for the wrong reasons. And I see this occur now in little mini disasters, but I think we're going to see some big disasters, especially in areas where they're going to get their lunch eaten by competitors that may not be building that technical debt, may have the innovative architect that's taking their business to the next level, may be able to weaponize generative AI for the right reasons and the right use cases, and do something that's completely different that's going to automate and incentivize their business to take it to the next level. So we're already getting companies where the technology is their product. In other words, their automation, their ability to automate systems, the systems that they're building becomes the company unto itself. They may not even have a physical structure anymore. They have employees, they have automated systems that exist all over the place in a virtual space. And their value is going to be their ability to be innovative and creative with this technology solution that's going to take the business to the next level, whether it's supply chain optimization, healthcare diagnostics, all these sorts of things that are starting to emerge right now. And that being the case, then the architect becomes the single most important person in the organization, in my opinion, that needs to convert the needs of the business for people who don't understand technology into a technological solution that's going to not only optimize the business, but really kind of take the business to the next level and really kind of become the business. Look at Airbnb. That it's just an automated technology. They don't own a single building or hotel. Same thing with used car, used car sellers and all these sorts of things. They're just technology. That's all they are. And their ability to have value in the business is their ability to differentiate their technology and innovations to take things to the next level. So the architect really has a role that becomes increasingly value moving forward. And that's why I tell people that has to be the right man or woman that you hire that's going to take your business to the next level. That needs to be well paid, needs to be well incentivized, and needs to be looked at to making the right decisions. And they need to have a team of people around them that, by the way, aren't just yes men or women, but they're asking the question, they're descending and having the discussions. And the most healthy time I get into is when I hear an argument about different technological solutions, because that means we're getting to a solution. We're not going to follow a particular lead just so someone has a strong personality. We're going to discuss, innovate, we're going to articulate, and we're going to argue about what the technology is and does, getting to the most optimized place to do it.
Yeah, and that's the key for me. The goal of architecture is optimizing the business. And that architect, therefore, to me, is a strategy consultant, a management consultant, a business architect, someone that's truly out there making that business better. I think it's one of the most critical positions in the entire company. Because if you get the architecture wrong, whether it's the business architecture, which is how the business operates, the technology architecture, which is how you use tech to support the business, I think the business is just going to go under. And
So you think we're saying that for selfish reasons because we're both architects, so we're trying to value ourselves? Or I truly believe it. I just come at when I look at the metrics, what's going on out there. I just see it over and over again. That's why I'm trying to build architects. The more architects we build, the more successful we're going to be.
And that's why I've been building architects, and I came out of retirement to do so for that reason. And it's not because I'm biased. I've been other things in my life too. But if you don't have the right plan, at least to me, everything falls apart. And whether you're to the doctor, a good doctor builds the right plan for the patient. And that might include medication, it might include lifestyle changes, it might include diet, exercise, you name it, stopping smoking. It's a whole package. Build that plan. If you're on a mission for the military, if your mission planning is good, you typically win. If your mission planning is bad, it's like rolling the dice and seeing what happens or flipping a coin. I don't like flipping a coin. So to me, whoever that person is that plans, they need to be good, and they need to be real good, because if we don't get to that goal, we're ultimately finding somebody else's plan. And I don't care how smart your developers are. I don't care how smart your network engineers are. I don't care how good your security people. If you're not building something and you don't have a goal, what are you really going to do? So to me, architecture is that goal. It is, my goal of architecture is digital transformation or business improvement or any non-vogue tech word you want to put about it. But how do I make my clients successful? I actually learned how to be an architect by learning how to practice internal medicine. When I joined my architecture career, and all these people were getting down in the weeds in tech 25 years ago, and I said, why? I said, have you asked the business? What are their goals? I don't know. I'm like, well, how'd you design this tag? Well, there's a reference architecture. I studied other people's engineering designs, and this is what they used. And I'd say to them, what were they trying to solve? Well, I don't know. What was their business goals and initiatives? I don't know. And then why are you trying to reuse somebody else's architecture if you don't know why they designed it? And that's the thing with these architecture frameworks. It's like, here, stick this, stick this, stick this, stick this, but they don't even address the problem that needs to be solved. And then I see people that have never been architects telling people you're going to learn architecture by looking at other people's designs, how they do it. But they never tell you the business. They never tell you the ultimate goals. They never tell you the inner workings of the business. And that's what I call reverse engineering, not architecture.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so what are we saying in terms of what people need to do to kind of improve the state of architecture, both as a valuable career choice and as valued in the organization? What do you think needs to happen out there in the industry right now?
I think people need to stop worried about these silly cloud certifications, unless there's a generic cloud certification that doesn't cover the vendors. I think people need to get good understanding of the fundamentals. What is that technology that we're talking about? How does it work, and what business benefits do they provide? I think people need good training, and I know we provide it, on how you put the pieces and parts together in a manner that's going to drive transformation and work at the same time. And then I think we really need a big focus on the business side. How do you consult to a business? How do you learn the business's needs? How do you see what other businesses are doing? What's the competition doing? What's the competitive landscape doing? How to truly understand that value chain, or how that company actually makes money, what its competitive differentiators are. Truly understanding where does that company want to be in the future, so we can give them the right tools to get there. And truly finding a way to make that business healthy and flexible and agile. And cloud computing may be more expensive, but the agility to me is the real secret. How do we adapt to changes? How do we adapt to interest rate changes when they occur? How do we adapt to a pandemic? How do we adapt to a natural disaster? How do we affect to supply chain shortages globally? How do we make the business do that? To me, David, that's the goal of cloud architecture.
Yeah, it's the ability to put volatility into a domain. And I said the ultimate in architectural skills is the ability to design things to change, which is something that's often overlooked. Everything's kind of statically configured. Of course, people will say, well, cloud computing is innately scalable. Not really, unless you design it to be, and you pick the right technologies to be. And so those are going to be the tougher decisions I think you have to make.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm sure we probably have a ton of questions, and I'd love us to get to them. But yeah, it's not inherently scalable, and yes, unless you make the right architectural decisions from day one.
Yeah.
And I think some of the tech, and we've talked in depth about technical debt, but I think some of it is the proprietariness that's being used out there. There's open solutions that we can use on the cloud that are going to work everywhere. And there's certain proprietary solutions in my mind that are quicker and easier, but they're deployed because people don't understand the alternatives. And I'm afraid that's going to make it very hard for people to move and adopt the right solutions.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So my team, you can bring in some questions for David and I. It looks like we had a whole lot come in. I love to answer questions. I'm sure David would be happy to do so as well.
No popcorn this time, Chris? You're on mute.
No, I just try to be a little bit more professional now. I mean, I do have 2 Coke Zeros in hand, ready to go,
Okay.
so that I don't have to step away.
Chris is going to be
No Jolt Cola.
Oh, that's old school. Yeah.
I got my Grinch mug of coffee also.
Well, we know I usually have my bottle, which is the Sencha. I love this alkaline water stuff.
Yeah. So we do have quite a few questions in the chat box, but I'm going to take advantage of being the one that's in charge here and ask my questions first. It's not so much question. One of them's a question, one of them's a comment. Early on, I don't remember. I think it was the first series or the first question that you guys talked about, but you mentioned, David, you specifically mentioned people management in your list that you were going down. And that's just, I just wanted to circle back to that, because that's just that goes into that whole non-technical skill side, that people need to be comfortable not just interacting with other people, but managing people.
Yeah,
and I don't mean telling them what to do, but managing the communication, managing the relationship. Can you
Very true.
talk a little bit more about that from your perspective? Because our audience hears it from me and Mike and Alonzo all the time, but I'd like to ask you to dive into that a little bit more about the people management.
Yeah, if you're telling people what to do, you're not doing people management. You have to hire the right people and have them know what to do, and understand expectations and set it forward. But if you're an architect, you're hiring the right engineering and the right team to make it happen. So in other words, you're figuring out how to evaluate them, you're figuring out what training they need, you're figuring out how to cultivate a winning team moving forward. My role as an architect, when I show up to a project, I handpick a team. So in other words, a network engineer, security engineer, governance engineer, data engineer, whatever kind of systems that we're moving into, different kind of engineering tasks to make it happen. How do you evaluate those roles and set the expectations for what they need to do? And you don't need to be a network engineer to tell a network engineer what's needed out of the network. So in other words, here's the architecture, here's the business objectives that we're looking at. You, network engineer, go figure out how to get us to the right solution that's going to get us to the performance level and the scalability level that's going to make us successful. By the way, database engineer, same thing. By the way, governance engineer, the same thing. So you got to have the chops, because you're in a leadership position in being an architect. You're leading people. In other words, they're going by your lead because you're doing the configuration. They're in essence I wouldn't say they're subordinate to you, but they're working with you. And they're tightly coupled to your decision that you're making. And so hopefully you're making the right decisions. And so you're hiring people, you're releasing people, you're making sure you have the right configuration of technology and talent that's going to take things to the next level. And so you're managing talent as well as technology. If you're picking technology without the talent, you have no way of delivering it because you got to have the engineers that Mike talked about. So it's a matter of you getting the dream team together to kind of take the technological architecture to the next level. And that's going to be part of the job. And by the way, that's something that a lot of enterprise architects aren't comfortable with. They don't want to do the hiring and firing. They don't want to do the interaction with the C-level folks. Yeah. When I would tell them, then enterprise architect probably isn't the role for you. As Mike mentioned earlier, you have to be C-level compatible, and you have to be able to understand what boards of directors say and what business objectives are and how to read financial statements and what business processes are all about. And you have to be able to hire the right talent suite of people to kind of take things to the next level and work with them to make sure that they're hiring the right people. And so people becomes a huge part of the role. I don't think if we're able to, and again, this is back to the predictions I had for 2024, the people management aspect of this and managing the supply chain is going to be critical to the success of all of this. I'm hearing failures right now. It's because they're not able to hire the right architects. They're not able to hire the right engineers because they don't have the skills they need, the number of people out there, the skills they need to take things to the next level. So either you're going to sit around and fold your arms and talk about how unfair the market is and no one wants to take the job. We can't find the skills that we need. Or you're going to basically work with your supply chain and make sure you have the skills within the supply chain to take your company to the next level. It's working with your team, your company, making sure they get the right graduates, they have the right skill sets, and they're building the right sets of skills to drive it forward. I always say take control of that. You don't depend on the market to be in their good graces to make sure they're producing the talent that you need. You need to figure out where the talent is, uncover it, retention careers. You have to kind of take things to the next level. And I understand that's an uncomfortable, unnatural act for many enterprises out there. But if you're going to be great, you're going to have to do that. If you're just going to be passable, then don't. So what do you want to be?
Yeah, it sounds like you need that cloud computing courage to not focus on being popular, but doing what's best for the business, even if it's going to ruffle a few feathers. So I think that's just really key. What about you, Mike?
My dad used to call it dare to be fired.
Yeah. And I love everything David just said there. I agree 100% with all of it, but he said one thing in there that is super important. You don't have to know how to do all the engineers' jobs. Yeah. And the biggest tech career mistake I see people do is they try to learn everybody else's job instead of mastering their own. Mm-hmm. Well, I got to know the network engineer's job. I got to be the software developer. I got to be the sysadmin. I've got to be this. And they're so focused on learning the skills that they don't need to know for their job, that in the end, they're terrible at their job. And David and I are talking about how to be the best. I remember on my first tech interview, it was 25 years ago, someone asked me if I'd done something, and I said no. And he said, how are you going to do it? I said, well, you know what? I've been practicing medicine and I've treated a lot of people with heart attacks, but I've never had one, thankfully. I said, you don't need to have to know a heart attack to be able to treat a heart attack. And the person said, yeah, okay. And then he hired me as a senior engineer. I had no experience because he liked my knowledge. But, you know, that's the key. We don't need to do other people's jobs. We need to be great at ours. Love everything you said there.
All right. So Alonzo, since I took the opportunity to ask a question that I have, do you have one, or do you want me to go into some of these from the chat box?
No, let's let the crowd get what they want. Let's get these questions knocked out for David and Mike. So I'll read them off and see what these gentlemen have in store.
All right.
All right. This is from Kevin, one of our students. And he's saying, for your first cloud architect role, is it better to work for big consulting firms or in-house like Accenture, AWS, or Azure compared to working contractual roles directly with the client?
Mike, you can go first.
Kevin, if it's your first tech job and you've never worked tech in your life, get the skills and get your first job where whoever's willing to hire you. That would be my recommendation if I wasn't coming from a tech background and I was looking for a job. You know, I don't have the selectivity to be able to say, ooh, would I like to work here or here when it's my first tech job? It's who's willing to hire me and who's willing to focus on me. That would be my focus if I was you, Kevin.
Yeah, I think I have bias for the consulting firms because I started and sold 2 of them and worked for one for 6 years. I think you're going to get an accelerated amount of skills in a very short period of time because it's a very intensive environment. And also you're going to be exposed to different problem domains and different clients and different people situations versus you working for just a single industry company, you know, working for a manufacturer or something like that. You're going to see the same systems, the same people, and you're going to have to deal with it year in, year out. Where in a consulting firm, you're going to show up, they're going to demand a lot from you in a very short period of time. You're going to have a very intense time making core decisions that you're going to have to accelerate because that's the value that you bring as being a consultant, and then move on to the next one. But the problem with the consulting thing, I think, because of the travel, it may be not sustainable over a long period of time. I do see a lot of young people who take that job, working there for 6-10 years, and then leave because they want to get off the treadmill. But they normally leave with lots of experience that they can convert and go work for an industry job. So that would be if you want to travel and work a lot of hours and go work for a consulting firm, they're going to make sure you get the experience that you need, but you're going to pay for it in terms of you being on an airplane and late flights and all the drudgery that I'm up going through for the last 20 years.
You mean the 300,000 miles a year of travel that we all do when we work for
Generative? Oh, yeah. Got the experience for that.
And they're with you.
So what's the next question?
All right. So apparently my questions disappeared. So I'm going to have to skip ahead to one that did not disappear and come back to the ones that did disappear. So this one is a 2-parter from Purnell. So Purnell says, what factors does an architect assess to decide whether an application should be refactored before transitioning to the cloud? And how can one evaluate whether an application is fit for the cloud environment? And what characteristics contribute to an application being considered appropriate or not for cloud deployment?
Okay.
Wow. All right. Not me.
Go for it, Mike.
Which one you gentlemen want to go first?
Purnell, what's the business goal?
Yeah.
Where does the business want to be next year and 5 years from now? If we don't understand that, we can't even think about it. What are the business processes that need to occur? If we don't understand that, we're putting the cart before the horse by even thinking of tech. What kind of technology competency does the organization have now? Are they willing to hire additional things long before we even think about the tech? Is the application amenable to being able to run in a different kind of environment? Or should it not run in the environment? What's it performing now? Is it going to meet the needs of the future? There are just some of the things I would even think about long before I would even get to the tech. So to me, I can't go to a technical question without spending hours and hours and hours and hours analyzing the business, analyzing the way the organization works, how they want the organization. And then after that, I can start thinking about it, Purnell. That's my perspective, David, but love your perspective as well.
No, I think it's very similar. You're at step 9 of a 30-step process, and we got to go through step 1 through 8. And if we haven't gone through that, everything Mike just said, understanding the business and making decisions. There's a lot of factors that come into this. It's kind of the same kind of question I get at conferences where people will go, "What's the best cloud?" Okay, well, you can't answer that. So I need to understand a ton of stuff ahead of this very tactical question that you have. And actually, when you get to that, it's going to be very easy to answer. But there has to be a lot of information that goes into, how we answer both these questions. I'm sorry to say it gives you the "it depends" answer, but it depends.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're from our community, they're used to the "it depends" answer.
Yeah.
we give the "it depends" answer a lot. What certificate or what should I study, security or networking? Well, it depends. What are you interested in?
Yeah.
we give the "it depends" a lot.
What's the best martial arts? I don't know. What are you trying to do?
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. So Ken prefaces this with, "I'm being inquisitive," and he says, "Speaking of security, if security is paramount in cloud architecture, then why isn't there an established governance for it? Networking has it, but the industry seems to lack governance and security."
Okay, same problem, Ken. You're already working on the technology and you're trying to establish the governance for a business and you don't know how the business operates.
Mm-hmm.
So every business is going to need different governance 100% of the time, because the way the US government needs to run is going to be different than Go Cloud Careers, which is going to be different than JP Morgan Chase. And even any kind of fluffy governance structures that exist in networking, they're all wrong, because you can't put a round peg in a square hole and expect it to be good. That's why the enterprise architect needs to work with the corporate leaders to actually design a governance structure that's appropriate. That's my perspective. How about you, David?
Yeah, I think that we have to figure out what you're doing first before you figure out a governance structure to it. I mean, if the question is the question is that I got to is we're not considering governance in many instances. That's true, and that kind of comes down to what Mike and I were talking about. There's bad architecture, and therefore people aren't asking the questions that need to be asked. But I mean, there's a ton of stuff that kind of goes into selecting the right governance framework that I don't understand what it is, and that needs to be understood first. And once you get to that, by the way, answering this question is fairly easy. So lack of governance, I agree. I see it as the biggest hole in some of the architectures that are going out there. That gets down to not necessarily what you're talking about here, but not having competent and capable architects that are picking the right technology stack, including governance.
Yeah.
From Anakin, what's your favorite thing about being a cloud architect or an architect generally?
Well, I love it because I get to help organizations improve their business, and I like making my clients successful. I also like it that in my youth I worked as an engineer, and everything I did was at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning when the systems were shut down, and I got treated like the help. And the engineers are very important, very critical people, but I watched the architects be well treated, be well paid. And I was coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning, working 90 hours a week. And it was like, "Mike, oh, good, you fixed that. Here's your new thing." And it just was never ending. But I like making clients successful. Same reason I liked internal medicine. I like making people healthy. So for me, that's it. But what do you love about being an architect, David?
Yeah, problem solving. I mean, I get a kick out of doing that, whether I'm, fixing motorcycles or bicycles or, mechanical things. And it's basically similar challenges with architecture, the ability to apply different knowledge and understanding to holistically fix an issue where you're building a complete system with all these parts are interdependent and functioning and working together. And so it's very satisfying to me when I put together a solution that I know is optimal for the particular problem domain that I'm looking at, and it's deployed and I'm seeing value that's coming back to the business. To me, that's that's more rewarding to me than anything out there. So that's why I enjoy it.
I like that answer. I like that.
Sure.
From Valerie, again, one of our students, Dr. Val. Thank you, David and Mike. Your insights are invaluable to architects and tech leaders everywhere. David, you said architects need courage to approach the C-suite. How has this served you in your career?
It's backfired a few times, but I don't regret any of the conversations I've had. So it's
I got a follow up for this one too,
okay.
David.
It's normally I work for very strong people that have courage unto themselves. If I don't, I shouldn't be working for them anyway. So if they throw me under the bus because I'm asking a question. I'm in the wrong place. And I've done that a few times. But, ultimately, you have to ask the tough questions because it's your job. And I tell them if I wasn't asking the questions, I wouldn't be doing my job. So if you try to maintain, a political, overly political infrastructure and trying to make glad hatting everybody, you're not going to be doing your job as an architect. You're going to have to push back on some things from time to time. And you need to have the ability and willingness to do that. That doesn't mean you do it all the time. You don't do it with insensitivity, but you got to have the courage to make that happen. Lots of architects, I talk to them is, why didn't you tell them it was a wrong solution? I can't bring that up now, man. That guy just picked that 6 months ago. He'll flip. And if then I tell me that person shouldn't be working here, and the person who's going to flip out shouldn't be working here. But if you're unwilling to make those changes, you're going to make serial mistakes, just kind of based on personalities, and everybody, trying to become, political around each other versus making core decisions that are tougher to make. So that's where courage comes from, your ability to kind of circumvent what I think people would have in some instances expectations and social constructs, to ask questions that people may not want to have asked, including the fact you made a decision based on the CIO going to a weekend retreat a year ago, and it was the wrong decision. What do you do now?
Yeah, it's interesting to find out, like, when people, they want the courage to pick that particular subjective solution, but once that technical debt rises, it becomes an abject failure. Are they going to have the same ownership to say I was wrong, or they're going to hand it off? And that's the irony of that.
Yeah.
And that courage and that leadership to have that conversation, that is a critical skill set. And, I've had that same conversation numerous times in my career. And that takes a leader. And it takes strong leadership skills to be able to do it, and excellent communication skills and emotional intelligence to do that without starting a fire.
Yeah, that was, I'm glad Valerie asked that question, because I've mentioned that I had two questions that I was going to bring up, and I only got one of them out. The other one I didn't bring up because I saw Valerie's was going to be about the importance of the emotional intelligence as it relates to that courage to say what's necessary sometimes.
And it's so critical. And I didn't see you were still speaking. It's going to lead into the next question. That skill to do what David just talked about, to be able to go to the executives, talk to them, talk about what people they need on their staff, talk about optimizing the business. That is an expensive skill. You're talking about a very rare skill set, and it's not a skill set that someone can just learn in certification. That is a very critical skill.
Yeah, expensive either by money or by experience and trial and error. That's how I got that experience.
Yeah. And it can either be trial and error over the years, which is a very expensive way to learn, or it can be through the right education. But in either case, you got to learn it, and it's expensive.
Yeah. And some people aren't built for those roles. I'll guide people all the time. I said, this may not be right for you if you're unwilling to, have those conversations. And I understand why they're uncomfortable. But if they don't happen, you're not doing your job. But there's lots of other jobs you can do where those conversations aren't part of it.
From Up and Up, David, why do you think it's important that your cloud architect need to be well paid?
Because you don't want them to leave. That's the main thing. So you got to pay them at least market, and I would say slightly above market. Yep. But if you're, just producing, 5%, 10% raises a year with not having to participate in bonus and stock ownership and all the stuff you get as being a key executive to the company, they're going to end up finding other ways to move, because someone else is going to value them and pick them right off. That doesn't mean you overpay somebody to an obnoxious extreme. But, I always look when I work with organizations as to, what people's salaries are and how they're aligned to the marketplace. In many instances, make an adjustment upward, whether even before they ask for a raise, so they maintain and they stick around, and having bonuses and, different things to incentivize, hanging around. The other thing is make it a good work environment to work in, make sure everybody's encouraged and, is getting the time to have a work-life balance and all that sorts of things. And I think that's keeps people from leaving more so than not. I see a lot of people leaving the roles now that they're back into the offices, and they see their work-life balance going away, where they're spending 80 hours a week in the office and 20 hours a week on commuting back and forth to work. and they're just calling it quits. And you have to look at those situations to see how you can mediate that risk. And so hybrid work environments, well-being, all these sorts of things, look holistically at what someone is, and also the ability to feel appreciated. In many instances, we're just missing the fact that we're not, telling people that they're doing a good job, and we appreciate having them around. We're not having those conversations, and they feel underappreciated, and then they take the next boat out of town.
Yeah. Imagine having such a wonderful skill set in a team and not feeling appreciated. If they don't want to pay well, then imagine how much that experience is going to go towards a competitor. It's going to be far more detrimental than paying that extra and incentivizing them to stay.
Yeah, if they're not making ends meet, they're going to take the train out of there. They have to be responsible for their family. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so now come the questions where we know that they're actually reading. So, hope
All
you're
right,
ready.
from Chris. You got it, Mike? I got it, Chris, or you want me to take that?
Go for it. I hope David's ready.
Oh, here we go, David. In chapter 2 of your book, you describe the unified data access layer for leveraging the data where it exists. If this becomes the standard, how? Also, won't there be any egress of the raw data? They're challenging you today.
Yeah, well, the unified data access layer is basically a way, to Mike and I's discussion earlier, linking it, that we talked about how to make abstractions of various without independent of technology. So the unified data access layer is just really kind of looking at a data model that's going to be independent of the physical databases underneath. So we're thinking about the data and what it means versus looking at the particular implementation on a particular database. So I don't care if it's an object database, relational database, that is not defined. We're defining a unified data access layer, which we can then map to a physical database. That's when we get the engineers involved. But we've thought through the value of that particular data layer and how it should be configured to fit the needs of the business. And that's all it is. And by the way, that's from the book I just wrote, but I also introduced that in my EAI book back in 1994. So it's something that's been around as a concept forever. And most good architects know how to do it. They call it data abstraction or data virtualization, or the ability to kind of look at data away from the physical databases. And this is really just kind of getting people to think about that. Right now, that seems to be going away. Everybody's looking at data as it exists in a particular database implementation. It's absolutely backwards the way in which you do it. And so also, won't there still be egress of raw data? Well, that's a particular tactical thing. Of course, there's going to be egress of data, but the thing is, I'm not defining where raw data is going to exist. I'm defining the whole database design, and whether you're pulling data out of that or pushing data into it depends on how it's implemented, which is down the line. That's step 20. I'm at step 1 through 5.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. People are like, I don't understand. This multi-cloud thing's going to be complex. And I'm like, really? For the last 30 years, we've had data centers spread throughout the world, and we had networking between them, and then we were able to share information. This is not a new problem. This is problems, like David said, any good architect should be able to do, whether it's data, whether it's networking, whether it's security, any of it.
From Daniel, David, in your book, they're getting into the book today.
Oh.
An Insider's Guide to Computing, can you explain ubiquitous deployment with an example?
Yeah, ubiquitous deployment is moving to a state where we're going to deploy processes and data on any platform it makes sense to deploy it on. You got to remember the last 10, 20 years, everybody was trying to centralize things and move it into a single cloud provider and move it to AWS or Azure and things like that. I don't think that was the right thing to do. Ultimately, we're going to look at the platform that's going to be optimized for the particular data set and the particular process, and we're leverage it where it exists. And so edge computing, mobile computing, you run on my wrist, running this computer, things like that. And Mike kind of goes to this because he's building a cloud in his house. But, ultimately, it doesn't matter where the data exists and where the process exists. We can access it, and it's ubiquitous. And in many instances, it's going to bring more value back to the business to leave it where it is or move it to particular databases. So the idea that we have to take everything off the legacy system, push it onto a centralized cloud platform, or take it off the cloud platform, push it onto a legacy system is some sort of a centralization of data and processes is typically contraindicated. Our ability to have an optimized architecture is our ability to leverage whatever platforms we need to leverage for whatever reason, for whatever purpose, and leverage the data from where it exists. So we're moving to an ubiquitous world where things are going to exist everywhere. It's already doing that in terms of multi-cloud based deployments, and we're building things like the super cloud to make that happen. So accept the fact that it's going to be any number of different platforms, and not to panic if that's where you're running it from. So you may have as many as 1,000 different platforms in your particular catalog. Right now, we have the technology and the networking stuff to leverage it where it exists, where it doesn't necessarily need to be centralized. When you start pushing things onto a platform for just the reason of centralization, you're making decisions for the wrong reasons, which is what Mike and I just got done talking about for an hour and a half. By the way, there's a blog and InfoWorld on Ubiquitous. I talk about federated architectures and the ability to kind of move in that direction. It's going to make people's heads explode, but so did cloud computing 15 years ago. So I take a look at that, and you can kind of get my vision as to where this stuff is going.
From Miss Lumen, what is the biggest gap in the lack of business capability mapping? What can we do to push for this proactively, especially for companies without it?
Miss Lam, can you ask that question without the jargon? I've been an architect forever, a business architect, and business capability mapping could be absolutely anything. I don't know what you're actually asking about. Are you talking about mapping out business processes? Are you talking about a SWOT analysis, the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities? I don't really know what you mean. So perhaps you can, unless David, you know what you mean.
I don't. That's why I was going to pass this on to you. What can we do to push this proactively, companies within? Biggest gap, lack of business capability mapping would be lack of understanding of the business. We just kind of leave it at that as a generic answer from a pretty generic jargon-filled question. Appreciate the question, though.
And Ms. Lam, and I know you. You can ask me the question later with clear terms, or and I'll make sure I answer it for you.
Where are enterprises going wrong with leverage cloud center of excellence to sharpen the cloud/digital strategy and ensuring that it's aligned with the company's North Star?
Okay.
Recovered. Go ahead, Mike.
So here's the thing to me. I don't need a cloud center of excellence. I don't want them in my company at all. I want my business executives and my architects to be talking to each other and be into aligning the strategy. The second we create some weird new cloud organization or weird new networking organization or weird new security organization, we're keeping the business people from talking to the architects and creating business silos. So for me, I want to get rid of all this stuff. I want to make IT a strategic capability for the business. And I want to remove and break down every single barrier that exists so that I can have somebody like a David come in and speak to the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, and constantly doing it and remove as much of the complexity and work from him so he can focus on making my clients successful. That's my perspective, but I like, simple management structures, and that doesn't make me right. So David, I'd love your perspective as well.
No, I agree. It's confusing, and I never promoted Cloud Center of Excellences for that very reason. I thought they were very distracting, and they kind of confuse the organization. So if we're going to have the architect that's going to sit in that organization, if they're just cloud focused, then they're not necessarily doing their job. So I would kind of avoid them. You can certainly have a testing center in a lab. People are going to experiment with technology, things like that. There's a function for that in some larger companies. But Cloud Center of Excellence, meaning we're going to make all the decisions, that's usually not a good thing. That needs to be delegated to people that have the responsibility of doing that.
I'm not sure if, like, say, for instance, from a project management perspective, having a PMO and translate it from that angle is going to be effective. Like you said, especially in one of the articles you mentioned, there's a cross-pollination of CEO and CIO understanding of how to execute this tech and what's going to be beneficial, looking at it from both their lens. It can't be from a centralized area.
All right, so our next one is another two-parter from Purnell. Purnell loves these two-parters.
All right, Purnell. Okay. Do you find that when designing solutions, most people are quick to look for possible solutions without spending enough time asking the right questions, defining and understanding? I'll wait for you all to digest the first one, and then we'll go to part two.
No. It's
okay, got you. Okay. Let's go back to, let's start over again. Okay. Do you find that when designing solutions, most people are quick to look for possible solutions without spending enough time asking the right questions and defining and understanding the actual business problem? which often leads to curing a symptom, but not the actual root problem. What is a balanced approach, especially when trying to convince teams and other executives?
That's a long way of saying hammer and nail.
Yeah.
So I think we'll both give you an answer. My perspective is competent people always start with the business, and people that don't know work with what they know, which is the tech. And there's a lot of hammers out there looking for nails, but that's because they're biased.
Yeah.
It's because their basis of education is certification, which creates bias, as opposed to people that are being trained on how to be an actual architect. But that's my thought. How about you, David?
No, I'd answer it the same way. So it is understanding the business before you start putting up technological solutions. The thing is, the last part of the question, trying to convince a team or executives, you show up and convince them from a financial point of view, from a business point of view. It's never a technology. By the way, we're using serverless. They don't know what that is. They don't care what it is. But we are using a technology stack that's going to be able traceable back to bringing another 25 cents EPS in next year's fiscal year, and they understand that because that goes to their own personal wealth.
Right.
It all goes back to effective communication. I mean, and I was telling somebody this the other day that maybe my goal is to increase revenues. Maybe my goal is to decrease cost over the next couple of years. So maybe make sure you have a solid understanding of what the actual goals are of the business or the department or whoever you're working with. Maybe the goal is to decrease wasted time from members in the team or of the workforce. So David talked about the finances. Finance is more than just dollars. It can be anything. Everything costs money at the end of the day, but you got to find that thing that's going to communicate to them, and that's what's going to convince them. Whoever that them is what do they want to hear, and what do they actually want to solve? Because they may not even know what it is that they need, and that's part of that. That's where your role comes in.
Yeah.
Is to help them realize, oh, this is what I need to solve my problem. But yeah, communication, the ability to communicate effectively, both gathering information and communicating your information to the individuals. Here we go.
From Riyadh, good to see you, buddy. David, what core principles or practices do you believe are vital for a cloud architect to prioritize in order to ensure sustained organizational success through their architectural designs?
That's a great question. Number one, it would be business that Mike just mentioned, which seems a little contraindicated if we're coming out of computer science school, but you need to have a core understanding of the business. So I would either, if you're going to become an autodidact and learn yourself, you're reading enough things about the business, you're talking to enough people within your organization, understand more about the business, what's really going on, and really kind of have that core understanding that most architects don't have. And I think is once you kind of understand that, the architecture will kind of appear in front of you as the right decision. And not necessarily as a collection of technologies, but an abstract reason of what we need to assemble to meet the needs of the business. And then we can assemble the different back-end technologies, the physical deployments, to make that happen. So I would, make sure you do that more than anything else. I think the biggest thing with architects I'm finding right now, they lack the business acumen. I think they need to be successful. They lack the communication capabilities to communicate with the C-level folks. And to Mike's point, they're focused too much on things that engineers are typically going to be doing.
From Hera, David, what do you think is the difference between a top-level software engineer and an architect?
Skill sets. I mean, our architect is an architect, so they understand, just like building a house, they understand the different construction methods and engineering aspects of it. So you're producing a design that's going to maximize the value and meet the needs of the business, and that's what architects are associated with. Engineers are dealing with things in the narrow, so they're dealing with tactical things that need to be paid attention to, and so they're engineering software, they're engineering AI systems, engineering databases, things like that, which just means that they're focused on the technical details of making these things work in the narrow. And normally they're focused on a particular vertical particular siloed access to that. So they're just focused on databases, they're just focused on networks, they're just focused on coding. So that's going to be the differences where architects focus on everything or have to understand everything. I don't think they should focus on everything.
All right, I'm going to read the next one off because it's part of the foundation for my soapbox that I always get on. But I'm gonna hold my answer. I'm gonna hold my commentary on it until I hear from the two experts.
Okay.
Regarding hiring for the organization, how do you become a good interviewer if you do not know the ins and outs of every detail regarding that particular skill set that you are hiring for?
All right, I'll start first. So again, I don't need to have a heart attack to know how to treat a heart attack. I know how to treat a heart attack because I've been trained. I also don't need to become a drug addict to treat a patient with a drug addiction. But here's the thing. We ask people the things that matter. What do I really care about an architect? Can they analyze the business? Can they ask the right questions? Can they learn? Can they read? Antiochus, I actually ask people, what's your best skill? And I look at the resume. And that's where I'm going to get my questions from. What's on their resume? Which is where most people go wrong. They basically tie their resume to a bogus job description, and then they've got all this stuff and they can't answer it. But I always will ask the people, what do you know best? And if I'm dealing with a networking person, I ask networking questions. If I'm dealing with a data center person, I ask data center questions, because the point is I know enough to know whether it's a right answer or a wrong answer. Now, if I'm going to ask someone a networking question, I can drill down and get really deep. But the answer is, I don't need to. I need to assess competency. As soon as a person starts with like, hey, I've got a solution for you, they're incompetent. They're incompetent because they don't know what problem is they're actually trying to solve. Part of being an architect is being a great interviewer, learning to ask questions. How does a management and a strategy consultant walk into a client and ask some mutually exclusive, collectively exhausted questions with logic and planning? So it's very easy. I don't need to know how to do somebody else's job to be able to ask them what they did. I can ask them questions, and I know if it's real or if it's fluff, and if they lied to me by not only reading their body language, listening to what they say, but here's what you'll find out. When someone puts something down and they've never done it before, it's going to be obvious in the language they use that they're trying to piece two pieces of technology together that don't go together and they don't fit. It'll be obvious to me. So that's my perspective, David. But I ask people, what's your strength? And then I ask them about the areas of their strength, because all I care is if you can learn one thing, you can learn other things.
Yeah, I would focus on the problem solving capability and what we know. I'm not going to quiz somebody on being a Python programmer if I'm not a Python programmer. So I would, just start looking for indications that they're taking me down a path and they don't understand what they're talking about. I would have them evaluated by someone who understands those skills at some point in time, but normally they're talking to a variety of people, including people who understand what they're doing, the details behind it, and people are just doing a professional interview to figure out what their competency is or their appearance of competency. And so I would do what Mike does. I just look for indicators that I'm being taken for a ride. Sometimes if people are overly enthusiastic and they start overly talking and speaking, and are they responding to me in code snippets, things like that, I don't think they know what they're talking about. If someone can explain to me what's going on, and even if I'm a layman, I would come in and say, listen, look, I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do. I'm the architect. I know a lot of things about a lot of it. Tell me, what you're good at and why you would hire, and see what they come back at. And look for indicators that they're not competent at what they're doing, which I can normally tell.
Yeah. And there's one dead giveaway. If I was to ask Alonzo to talk about BGP and he says, I know networking, I'm certified, that's the giveaway that he knows absolutely nothing. When someone says, here's my credential, instead of answering a direct question.
So before we move to the next one, I just wanted to add this 2 cents. The question from Antiochus here is based on what I view as a false premise. As a hiring manager, you know what skill sets you're hiring for. Mm-hmm. You may not know the technical aspects of some of the skill sets, but you know what you're looking for as a hiring manager, so you know how to interview for it. So now, people that aren't the hiring manager, I have no idea how they do the interviews. I don't know how you may. And I was the guy in human resources that did the interviews that didn't know what he was interviewing for. So I don't yeah. But the hiring manager, they know what they're looking for, and they know how to interview for it. And that's, you're in our program. So you're going to realize we focus on a lot of these things.
Mm.
So, let's see. So Sid, I'm going to ask Mike to invite you to our webinar on Thursday, but I'll put the question up for Alonzo to read.
Okay, Sid. How would a person transition into becoming a cloud architect role? I've worked on some SaaS and PaaS, and even built some securities architecture prototypes, but not sure what recruiters, managers are looking for.
So Sid, download the guide, How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job, come to the webinar. I've got people every day. For example, Al Legister was hired as a senior solution architect by Deloitte with no experience. Ivan Tamba, for example, hired by AWS with no experience. Daniel Bosu, hired by JP Morgan Chase, and he didn't graduate high school as a solution architect with no experience. What's his name? Pierre Dussault in Canada, who was working on sailboats, hired. I could give you examples all day, but that's the key. But you said you built security architecture prototypes. How did you build them? Did you ask a CEO about their business and what their business assets are and what their intellectual property is worth? And did you find out, the way the people work and remote access? Because you can't design a security architecture until you know what you're protecting, the value of what you're protecting, and the potential risk factors. So, come to the thing tomorrow, come to our webinar tomorrow. No, on Thursday, download the completely free guide and we'll talk about it. But that's the difference. We can't reverse engineer as architects. We have to know what we're designing because we have to know what problem we're solving. So working on tech teaches you how to. Designing tech takes training. And here's the difference. There are people that are called construction workers that build hotels. And they've got lots of hands-on experience building, but nobody's going to hire them to design a shopping mall or a bridge or a hotel, because that's what an architect does. You need to be trained for it. So there's one of two ways you can get training. You can work in the field for about 30 years and ask questions along the way, or you can get training. I'd rather see you get training. That's what I did. But there's lots of ways. But download the free guide, come to the webinar. We'll tell you what you need to know so you know exactly how to get hired. And it's the best career ever.
Great advice.
Right. So this next question, David, I'll leave it up to you on how deep you might want to go or how shallow you might want to go, because I can imagine this might be a long one.
Okay, from Ken. David, tell me a story about your most challenging experience you had in your cloud career, and how do you navigate through it, or did you? If already mentioned, I'm acquiring specifics and unfiltered versions.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Okay, probably dealing with people who are pushing a particular solution without a business purpose. And then I ran into that a few times, and it's easier to do now at 60. I can normally navigate through it because I'm a little bit more experienced of a communicator. But when you're 20, those are tough conversations to do because you're the young kid and no one wants to listen to what you're saying. But the reality is I saw a lot of inefficiencies that happened and had to speak up. And so that was challenging for me because I'm arguing with someone who's twice my age and has 20 years more experience. And, I'm not necessarily going to win the argument, but I had to go ahead and mention it. And I think in some instances I changed minds, and some instances I didn't. So I always decided to take the right, is what they call it, the ability to, go down the right path and argue when you're needed to argue, or say things that were kind of unpopular at the time, but that needed to be said, despite the fact they may have a negative impact on you. In this case, it did. It hurt my career, and I did work around it and I learned from it. But I chose not to, let some things go. And I think I'm a better person from it. But at the time, it did stall things for a few years. You want the names?
We don't name names here. Maybe offline.
Yeah.
But, all right.
Love
here we go. Here's our next one.
All right, back to Kevin. Gentlemen, how important is it to develop loyalty and incentives for all levels of stakeholders, for instance, employees, teams, bosses, vendors, and clients?
I actually don't know what you mean. How important is loyalty? 100% critical. How important is integrity? 100% critical. How important is it for stakeholders to be paid and incentivized by their organizations? Absolutely critical. But if you're an architect, you're going to be incentivized by getting bonuses based upon how much your team or region sells, plus, other business executives. So if people aren't paid well for their job, you're not going to have access to the best. If you've got a team of inefficient people and you don't replace the weak with strong, guess what? You're going to have a team that doesn't perform well. So I don't completely know what you're asking here, Kevin, but that would be my read on it. How about you, David?
No, it comes down to respect and values. You got to have respect and value the people who work with you, and make sure they know that. So you don't have to over compliment them, but give them a Amazon gift certificate every Friday.
No.
But just kind of have a conversation with them. That hey, I really enjoyed. You made some great decisions with that architectural role that you put out, and just want you to know we appreciate it. And we view it and we value you. So those are conversations that are easy to have. And that's how you maintain loyalty, is because if they feel they're valued, they feel they're paid fairly, and they feel they're doing interesting things and they're working with good people, they're going to hang around. If one of those things aren't true, they're going to leave.
All right. So the next one, Alonzo, is two parts of the same question.
All right, let's roll it, man. Let's
All
roll
right.
that footage.
And the way I'm reading this, I
Need some
I want to see how
interpretation.
everybody else reads it.
Okay. From Kevin, as a person that's interested in private equity as well as architecture, where understanding the pulse of the business is essential, would it be unethical to bring immense value to a business through architecture and then in turn work on getting a deal to sell it? Curious minds are inquiring.
So
The way that I read that is he's developed something for a company and then he wants to turn around and sell it himself. That's the way I read that.
That's a conflict of interest, but I'll defer to these two gentlemen.
Yeah. So
well, here's the key. If you have a product or solution that delivers value to people, it's fine to sell it. Why? Because if I've got a product that you pay $1 for and get $10 in return, it's fine for me to charge you $1 because I'm giving you a return on your investment. Now, I don't know why you're mixing private equity and architecture unless you're trying to design an architecture for a private equity firm. But, that's part. Now, if you work for the company, if you work for a bank, and then you want to try and sell them something that you developed for them, now that's unethical. Yeah. Because they own the product. That's their intellectual property because they paid you to be there. So I'm not completely sure that I understand your question. Maybe David has a different perspective.
Some ambiguity there.
Yeah, based on what I think he's built something in a company, and he's there's some value to it, and he's looking to take it outside the company for whatever reason. And to Mike's point, it's unethical for you to do that. Normally, it's probably going to be illegal and can be fraud. And so depending on the state that you're in, but it's something that I wouldn't poison myself with doing. If you're looking at, you have something that's of value, take it to the manager of the company and say, this may have value outside of the company. Would you mind if I wanted to develop this as a business and, share in the profit of it? If it turns out to be anything, they may take that on, but normally they're not really interested in doing that. That's a huge distraction. So I'd tread very lightly moving forward and make sure you make the right ethical decisions.
There was a certain security firm down in Atlanta where the former CIO, he had created cyber attacks against certain prospective companies. Once they got attacked, he swooped on in with possible solutions to help mitigate the very issues that he caused. So to your end, Kevin, he ended up losing his job, ended up having to pay over $818,000 in restitution. His brand is garbage at this point, and I'm sure that he will probably never work in that sector again. So I say all this to say probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Now, if you are working as an outside consultant, that's a completely different story. Now, but it depends on what agreement you've entered into with this company. Now, you may have entered into an agreement that whatever you're working on for them is theirs, or whatever you're working on is yours, and they're licensing it from you. So it depends on your situation. If you're working specifically for the company, whatever you're doing is the company's.
Talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, talk to a lawyer. We are not legal advisors.
Way you go.
Thank you, David. I need to put that at the beginning of every show from now on.
Talk to a lawyer.
All right. Now it's something we can talk more about.
From Ida, how can one build confidence if you don't have a degree or lots of back experience when facing client intimidation, gentlemen?
Like, here's the thing. Your confidence will be developed based on your competency. The better prepared you are, the better you know your skill set, the more confident you're going to be. So train hard, learn every day, and work to get better every day, and then your confidence will improve. When I got my first job, here's what I did. I left internal medicine. I was hired as a senior network engineer, and I was terrified. I didn't feel good about it. I actually said to my wife, I said, can I get a new credit card with like a $5,000 limit so I can buy lunches and dinners and drinks for people? So before they realize I know nothing, I can at least have a friendship with people. And I literally stayed home and read 1,000 pages a day, every day for the first 6 months. And guess what? After a month, I was confident and I already moved into the top team. So that's the key. Work on getting better and then you'll have confidence. Get the right training and then you'll have confidence. Practice and then you'll have confidence. But that's my perspective. David, you might have a different one.
Yeah, great advice. You don't need a degree, by the way.
Nope.
Actually, four of the 6 best architects I ever worked with did not have a college degree. And I realized that, probably years after I was working with them. So they got the experience, the hard way. They read, they took classes and things like that, and were able to catch up and become very good architects. So, and it's not necessarily a requirement for a job anymore, which I think is a good thing. I think college has value in some areas and not in others. And I think the technology thing with people's a problem solver, they're autodidact, they're more value to me than someone who's got a particular piece of paper. And then it comes down with your own confidence in building stuff. This is all about you having the courage to do unnatural things to kind of take your career to the next level and challenge yourself to do things you would normally not be comfortable in doing. And that's the only advice I can get. So take jobs that you feel you're underqualified for. If they're willing to give you the job, then do everything you can, learn everything you can, figure it out. And if you do that, it'll be easy to you. And the next job will be easier and easier and easier.
All right. So as much as I'd love to continue this conversation, we do need to wrap it up. I know David's got a hard stop. I know Mike has a meeting as well. And Alonso and I are always running around doing things. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I do want to let everybody know if you've got more questions about the cloud architect career, the cloud computing in general, cloud architecture, anything of that nature, we're going to be on YouTube tomorrow, same time, same place, 2:00 for just a general Q&A session. We do that every week. And then, of course, you can join our webinar on Thursday. Tyrone will be putting that link in the chat box. And you can get our free e-guide to how to get your first cloud architect job as well. But I'd like to ask David and Mike if you guys have any last words. We'll start with David and then let Mike close it out. Alonso, Alonso, do you have any last words?
I'm giving it to these gentlemen. I'm ready to hear more.
All right. So let's, David, if you will, I'm glad you joined us again. Always look forward to having you with us.
Definitely.
Yep. These guys have a great program. Take advantage of it.
All right. And if you're interested in his book, I'm sure you can find it through your LinkedIn page, David.
Yeah, on Amazon. Just type in my name.
Just type in his name. There you go.
Dave the Cloud Guy. It'll pop up.
All right.
Love it.
Because I saw a question or two about the book. So yeah, just type in his name on Amazon and it'll pop up.
And I highly recommend his book. No, I'm not an affiliate. No, I don't get paid for it, but I really like his book, and I think it'll be helpful to everybody to read it.
Thanks, guys. You're too kind.
So before I actually close this, I want to actually get to Freedom's Land's question. And he says, he's learning, but how's the best way to apply things versus reverse engineering? You have to get trained to be an architect. You don't become a doctor by just reading books. You don't learn how to fly an airplane by just guessing. You have to have a pilot, an experienced pilot, take you up there and train you to learn how to fly the plane. And these jobs that, like architects, which pay more than most physicians and more than attorneys live, require a substantial set of knowledge. In order to get there, you can either waste 25 years trying to learn everybody else's job and hope to get there, or get training and get there immediately within a year or so. So whatever the case is, that's how you build a career. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank David for coming. He always adds so much. He's a wealth of information. He and I speak frequently, and I think you'll hear more from us in the future, and maybe see some more videos from us and other things as well. I also want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you for your fantastic questions. I love them. That means you're thinking, you're learning, and this is what I like to see. I'd love you to get these free guides, Why Tech Skills Are Not Enough. I would like you to get the How to Get Your First Architect Job, and I'd like you to join us on the free webinar on Thursday. I'll be here again tomorrow to answer questions. I'd like to thank you all so much. So for all of you who joined, take care. We'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.